All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Today's guest is Bryan Gruley. Bryan is a former colleague, still a good friend, not a former friend, but still remains a good friend. We worked together at the Detroit News. Bryan went on after the Detroit News, worked in the Washington Bureau for a little bit, and then went to work for the Wall Street Journal in the Washington Bureau, where he won a Pulitzer Prize as part of a team that covered 9/11. And then eventually, Bryan became the bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal in Chicago, and then worked for Bloomberg Businessweek. He has written, this is his sixth novel called Bitter Frost, and he's had five other fiction books, plus Paper Loss, which was about the Detroit News and the Joint Operation Agreement, which was actually a great book. And I have to say, Bryan was always outstanding writer, was one of the stars of Detroit News and all of the other publications he worked at. In fact, he'll tell you that himself.
Oh, yeah.
But and
it's confirmed.
Yes. And we're going to get to a little bit while he was at Bryan used to do imitations of Ernie Harwell, still does. And he prompted other people to do the same, but not as well as him. And Bryan did do a story about Ernie Harwell for the Wall Street Journal, which we'll get to a little later after we talk about his latest book called Bitter Frost. Tell us about the title and what the book's about.
I'll just show you the cover. Everybody thinks it's two words, Bitter Frost. Right. It's Bitter Frost. It's one word. But, the cover I think is beautiful. And it's actually this 2-track into the woods actually figures in the plot. Bitter Frost is a town I made up. It would be, so this being Michigan, it would be about up here, sort of by Cross Village, Goodhart.
Near the Traverse City or north of Traverse City?
About an hour north of Traverse City, I'd say.
Yeah.
Somewhere between Harbor Springs and the bridge.
Okay.
It looks like Manistee, Michigan, which is back down here. Manistee is a town where I did a story once on a guy who killed a buck with his bare hands. Page one story for the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it was awesome. Hilarious story. But I like the town because the downtown sits on a river that goes from Lake Michigan right through the middle of town. And same thing in Bitterfrost. So the story is about a guy named Jimmy Baker who grew up in Bitterfrost, played hockey there for the elite amateur team that plays the Ice Kings. See my shirt. And Jimmy went in the minors. He's a big guy, strong guy. He's got kind of an edge. Ends up becoming a fighter. And one night he almost kills a guy in a fight, and he walks away from the game after that fight.
Okay.
So now it's 13 years later. Jimmy is the Zamboni driver for this Ice Kings team in Bitterfrost. He's lost his wife. He's lost his livelihood. He's just trying to be a good guy. And one night he gets into a sort of confrontation with a couple of knuckleheads from Detroit who were drunk and hassling the barmaid. And he wakes up on his floor. A few hours later, he doesn't remember much. He's covered in blood. He's in pain. And then the next day, one of the guys is found beaten to death. And Jimmy's past comes back to haunt him because who else in Bitterfrost could have done something like this? So,
do you want to read a few paragraphs of the book?
I can read it. Yeah, I'll read the first. How about if I read the first 40 pages?
Yes, that's fine. We've got all day. I want to say we ran the first chapter, the excerpt from Deadline Detroit, if you want to read it. And I have to say the writing is very impressive, and it does a great job of really bringing you into the book where at the end of the first chapter, you definitely want to read more. So
I'll read like a minute and a half of this.
Sure. Go for it.
Jimmy wakes to a pinging sound in his head and the smell of blood. He sits up too quickly and pain blazes up from the base of his neck. It wells inside his skull like a fist forcing its way out. He shuts his eyes, trying to squeeze it away. The high-pitched pinging ebbs, but the throb persists. He opens his eyes. He's sitting on his kitchen floor in the dark. He checks the clock on the microwave, 3:53. He's still wearing the black and silver Ice Kings jacket he wore to the hockey rink and then to the Lost Loon Tavern. A draft of winter air cascades over his face. He sees his back door is open 6 inches and trembling on its hinges. He gets up to close it and notices he's wearing only one boot. He hobbles outside on his booted leg. The security light blinks on. Jimmy's other boot is lying on its side on the porch step. As he squats to pull it on, he spies a ragged path of packed down snow leading away from the porch, as if someone dragged in an animal. He goes back inside, closes the door, and flicks on the lamp hanging over the kitchen table. Still smelling blood, he lifts his left hand to his face. Jesus, he says. The hand is spackled with dried blood, the knuckles a hash of shredded skin and exposed bone, a shade of rust. Blood spatters the silver sleeve of his jacket from wrist to elbow. As he stares at it, the hand begins to ache like it would after pounding some guy's forehead and cheekbones in the middle of a hockey game. What did he do to himself, or God forbid, to someone else?
That's great. Well, let me ask you all the detail there and the pain and the blood and stuff like that. Do you do research on that? Do you use your imagination, or is it both? Or how do you arrive at such a detail that seems like you really know what you're doing there?
It's a little of both. Mostly it's imagination. I mean, we've all, even when we were just little kids, we've been in fights, we've seen fights. I play hockey, so I know some guys who've been in fights. Mm-hmm. One of them told me in some detail about how he approaches a fight, and I use that later in the book when I'm describing Jimmy in a particular fight. But most of it was imagination and putting myself in that kitchen. He's lying on the ground and what's happened to his hands. And it's things I've read over the years, reading sporting stuff. I remember reading a story in the Journal of all places by John Bussey, an old friend, about I think it was Joey Kosher, who played for the Red Wings,
right,
and was a badass fighter,
right.
And it was all about his hands. He couldn't even put them in his pockets because they were so messed up. The knuckles were shattered. So all of that goes into it, and it's in a way, Alan, it's journalistic. You always, when you're writing narrative, you're going to be in a scene. You want the reader to feel like they're there. And the way to do that is with little, an accumulation of little details.
Your books are take place in Michigan. Do you feel like that's where your fan base is, or does it not matter? Are the books read nationwide, or what? Do you have any sense of that?
Well, setting aside whether I have a fan base or not,
what if any?
I started. The first novel was called Starvation Lake. And when I was talking about that book to my agent, we debated someplace in Michigan, because I'm from Michigan. I know the place, I don't have to go somewhere and do a bunch of research. I know that. And we debated whether to set it in downriver Detroit or northern Michigan. And I just knew northern Michigan better. I mean, I played hockey in Trenton and Melvindale and Ecorse, Wyandotte, but it just came out that way. And then that turned into a 3-book deal. So I did 3 in Starvation Lake. And then I shifted over to southwestern Michigan with the 2 Bleak Harbor novels.
How those books do?
Okay. I'm never going to be Michael Connelly or James Patterson. But then they're never going to be me.
Exactly. I was going to say that. It's the amazing girls who could possibly achieve that.
Yeah. So, I know the places, and people who read these books recognize not only the fictional towns, Starvation Lake and Bitterfrost, but, there's also Traverse City and Kalkaska and Grayling and Bel Air and Gaylord. They're all mentioned in there. But as for my fans, I'm sure I have more sales in the Midwest than I do in Texas, for instance.
Right.
Just because, people gravitate to
Right.
that. And
So,
I can't, if you try to write for everybody, you're going to get nobody. So just
right. And tell me, a book like this, how long does it take you to write, and how disciplined you have to be to finish it? And what's your routine like? Is it waking up at, a lot of people say, I wake up at 5 a.m. I write for an hour, or what is it? What's your sort of secret sauce?
when I was working full time up until late 20, I would get up, not like at 5 a.m. or something, but I get up early. And when we lived in Chicago, I just walked down the street to this great coffee shop called Heritage, and I'd sit there for an hour to 2 hours writing. And then I'd shut it down and go to work at the Journal Bureau. And then after I retired, I find it, I can write at any time, not at night though. I never write at night. I like to have dinner with my wife and watch TV and do some reading and go to bed. But during the day, I can write now. I find sometimes I write in the morning, sometimes I write in the afternoon, sometimes I write both. I spent 2 hours writing earlier this afternoon. When I'm done here, I'm going to write for another half hour or so.
Okay.
And I can write anywhere.
The stretch that you write at one time.
2 or 3 hours. 3 hours is a long one for me. But it's good for me, it's good to write every day, or at least 6 out of 7 days. And even when I'm not writing, I'm frequently going over what I've written, maybe editing pieces and trying to figure out where I'm going to go next. So how long does it take me to write a book? Well, it ranges from, I think the fastest book I ever wrote was The Hanging Tree, because I had to, because I wrote another book that sucked. So I was like, I needed another year. I asked my agent, hey, can I have another year? And she goes, I can get you 7 months. I said, well, I wrote a really bad book in a year and a half. Just imagine what I can do in 7 months. But actually, Hanging Tree is a pretty good book. It's probably my favorite until now, BITTERFROST. And this one took me, I didn't have a deadline. I didn't have a contract. My agent didn't like it. She told me stop after about a third of the way through, but I kept going because
how do you feel? What happens when somebody tells you, hey, this kind of sucks?
Usually, well, I wish she said it kind of sucks. It was much more forceful than that. But, I had other readers, John Eig, Pulitzer winner, Anna Quindlen, New York Times bestselling writer, who were telling me this is really good. Just keep going. And then I had to sell it on my own. And there are a few publishing houses that will accept manuscripts that don't come from agents. And Severn House in the UK is one. And they read it and said, bring it on. Here we go.
So they liked it. How did you feel? Do you feel vindicated, or?
Well, I don't know. It's not really vindication. It's not a grudge match. It's just I was happy that I spent all this time and somebody believed in it.
Right.
Somebody said, this is really a good story. And then I got the opportunity to work with editors who made it better, helped me make it better. And now it's done. And the reviews so far have been very strong. And I'm hoping for more. I mean, there are those. I had a review the other day on NetGalley, 2 stars because too much profanity.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, it happens, what's really funny is I've gotten low star reviews on my early books from people who said, I don't like hockey. All you got to do is look at the flap copy. It's like going into Baskin Robbins, ordering a chocolate chip cone, and they give it to you, and you go, "What? I don't like chocolate chips."
How do you feel?
Order it?
How do you feel when you get criticism like that? The reviews is it dejecting, or is it just like, yeah, fuck them? Who cares?
Well, no, it's not personal. It's sometimes it's good. It's good, smart criticism. It makes me think going further.
Right.
Sometimes it's people who they read like 5 books a week, and their whole objective is to figure out who did it early.
Right.
And so that you'll be penalized if you're a writer and they figured it out. But when I read that, the reader says, "Oh, I figured that out on page 142," and I'm thinking, "Shit, I wish I knew what was going to happen on page 142."
Your agent is your main person that you bounce stuff off and say,
Initially, yes.
take a look at
I have other readers who like read my books. One of our former colleagues, Mark Hornbeck, he loves mysteries and thrillers, and Mark's read my last 2 or 3 books, and he's read a chunk of the book I'm writing a sequel to BITTERFROST.
Okay, nice.
He's read it, and usually he just emails me, "Gruley, who wrote this shit, and put your name on it."
You say that was AI. I just fed it in and said,
"Oh man,
that's something interesting."
Jimmy Baker is an ex-fighter. Boom, book.
Now you've named some in some of your books. You've named characters after people you've known,
right?
And do people appreciate that, or?
No, usually, yeah. I never name major characters after people I know, because I don't want to make them uncomfortable.
Right.
But I need to name a drugstore, so it's Strum and Drug. A buddy of mine I used to play hockey with. I need a law firm, Egan, McDonald, and Brown, 3 of my best friends, Egan, Smack, and Browning.
Right.
I think Hornbeck is mentioned in one. I think there's a Lengel.
Yes,
and, I believe in Bleak Harbor, there's a Lengel.
Yes,
I don't know if it's an Alan Lengel, but he's a reporter, and he's very helpful.
Right. And you've asked me, I know some of the books, or at least one of the books you asked me something about, I think the court system or something. So you try to make it as realistic as possible, where somebody doesn't read it and go, "What the fuck? This is not," like a lawyer would read it and go, "No, that's not how it works."
Yeah. I try to. On BITTERFROST, I consulted with a criminal defense lawyer who's in Petoskey. So he's in the geography. He's an experienced criminal defense lawyer. I asked him a lot of questions. He answered them honestly. He read the manuscript, and then I put him in. He's a minor character in BITTERFROST. Ron Varga is his name. He's a great guy. He was enormously helpful, and he didn't even know me when I reached out to him. A friend of mine put me with him. So. But on the other hand, I'm going to take a little bit of license. I'm going to have some fun.
Right.
And people say, "Well, that would never happen." And I say, "Well, it's fiction. There's no such thing as lightsabers."
Right.
So,
do you feel like that people kind of get mad or something and say, "This is such bullshit. I live here."
Yeah. My first book got this review on Amazon, since you asked about reviews. And it was probably 1,000 words long, and it just ripped it to pieces, and it really attacked one of the sub stories in Starvation Lake. Is based on something that actually happened. A Cincinnati Enquirer reporter basically broke into
the
voicemail system of Chiquita.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And he thought that could never happen. Well, it did. It did happen.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, the headline on that review was "Random Suspenseless Trash." and I said to Pam, my wife, I said, "Wow, that would make a cool T-shirt." And then I forgot about it. And then about 6 months later, Christmas comes, and there I have a black T-shirt that says "Random Suspenseless Trash."
Awesome.
So bad reviews, you turn the lemons into lemonade.
I remember that reporter who was a buddy of yours, right?
Yeah, Mike Gallagher.
Yeah, you guys worked in Kalamazoo together, was it? Yeah. I remember that because I was in the Lansing Bureau Detroit News, and he was, I think at the time, he had been at the Cincinnati paper, but then he went to the Lansing State Journal, I think, after that or something.
I think he went to the Lansing State Journal first, and then he went to the Enquirer.
Okay.
And he got in trouble with the Chiquita story, which the stories were true.
Right. Yeah, it was a
Now I
fascinating.
got the stories right. It was just his methods that got
Right.
called into
He
question.
broke in. He got into the voicemail system of the Chiquita Banana people, and
Yeah, of the lawyers and PR people, and
yeah,
and
it was
uh,
quite
you know,
a
and so in Starvation Lake, Gus Carpenter, the main character, gets into a similar dilemma, and he makes a couple of bad choices, and it costs him.
well, it's interesting. David Simon, who wrote The Wire, who was a former
Right.
Baltimore Sun
And
reporter,
homicide, and
he came to one of our when I was at the Washington Post. He spoke at the Post bar to a group of union people, and one of the questions I asked, I said, "Do you miss being a reporter?" He says, "Nothing's changed." He says, "I still go out to lunch with the lieutenant and the people from City Hall." He says, "I just put it all in the show."
yeah,
So he always tried to make it very, very realistic. Um, when I always think of Bryan Gruley, among many things, I always think of you always did Ernie Harwell. You did a great imitation. Do you care to say a word or two?
I gotta give credit where credit is due. The
Yeah.
guy I first heard do Ernie Harwell is Mark Hornbeck. I mentioned him
Oh,
earlier.
really?
And
Okay.
Hornbeck does a great Ernie Harwell.
Uh-huh.
And I
Okay.
heard that, and I'm like, oh, so I start doing it.
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Langle. Today's guest, Alan Langle. Tell us, Alan, what high school did you attend?
What if any? What if any education did you have?
And a young man from Ishpeming, Michigan will take that ball home.
And now you did probably fulfilled one of your dreams. You did a profile on Ernie Harwell for the
I
Wall
did.
Street Journal. How did that come about, and how was it hanging out with Ernie Harwell?
Oh, one of my heroes. I love Ernie. I loved Ernie because when you turned on the radio, you're driving back from up north to Detroit. So you put on the Tiger game. And if Paul Carey's on, you're going to wait half an hour to hear the score. He would never say the score. But Ernie, one of his things was he's always going to tell you the score. Every now and then he's going to say, well, the Tigers need some instant runs. It's 4-2. And then he'd give you a little replay. George Brett homered always, or Dewey Evans, one of those guys who's always homering on the Tigers. Anyway, so Ernie was retiring, and I thought, why not? And I think our old colleague Bonnie DeSimone told me, you need to go do the story.
Uh-huh.
So I forget how I contacted Ernie, but he was all for it.
Uh-huh.
I flew to Detroit. My dad picked me up, and Ernie lived like 2 miles from my dad in Farmington Hills. So he took me to Ernie's house, and my dad was more enthralled than I was. He had a copy of Ernie's book.
Oh, really? Oh, he did.
And he called him Mr. Harwell. You don't have to call me Mr. Harwell. And then Ernie drove me to Comerica Park to watch the game. And
wow.
I remember driving down. One of his turn blinkers was on almost the whole way, but I didn't have the heart to tell him. Neither did I have the heart to do my Ernie Harwell impression for him, which I should have done.
And you never did it for him?
No, I never did. And he, he was awesome. He took me all around, introduced me to all these Tigers. We went down on the field. He introduced me to Al Kaline and Jim Price and Ichiro. They were playing Seattle.
Wow.
And just a great man. And then several months later, my parents we were having a 50th anniversary surprise party for him. And so I emailed Ernie and I said, tell me if I'm over the line here, but my parents love the Tigers. Could you get autographed pictures of Kaline and Alan Trammell? And he immediately emails me back. I'm on the case. So the next day I'm in New York and I'm having beers with some Wall Street Journal friends, and my phone rings. And I pick it up and go, hi, it's Bryan. And I hear, hello, Bryan, it's Ernie Harwell. I'm at the ballpark. And, I'll tell you what, you hear it on the radio, it's one thing. You hear it on your cell phone. I almost fell out of my chair. And just a great man. And I was able to stay in touch. And then my dad went into assisted living after my mom died. Ernie was was in the same facility.
Oh my gosh.
So I was walking around with my wife and son, and my dad's giving me a tour. And I see Ernie, and I go, "Hey, Ernie!" And he turns around and he goes, "Oh, there's Bryan, the big book guy." And he came over to talk with us. And my son Joel turns to me and goes, "Dad, you really do sound like him." So, but a nicer man, except for you, Alan. There's probably no.
Yes. What if any? Yeah, that's a great. I always think when I think of Bryan Gruley, I always go, "Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome." And so you've been in the news business a long time, and we've known each other a long time. Do you miss it? And does the book kind of take the place or satisfy your writing Jones or whatever?
No, I don't miss it at all, especially now.
Yeah.
Writing books. I've written a couple of short stories I got published recently. That's good. I just don't miss, because I know what it's like now, the pressure to be first.
Right.
I can't imagine what my email and texts and my Signal account would look like. Look like now.
Right.
When if you're at the Journal, or where I was, or even Bloomberg Businessweek, or the New York Times, it's just constant, and there's always the danger that you're going to err into always first, frequently right territory. That's not where you want to be.
Right.
So
and you
no, I don't miss it. I knew I was done. I knew I was done at 20, and I loved it. I mean, what a great blast of a career. I had great fun.
Absolutely, and I mean, you were really outstanding as a reporter and a writer. And you worked, and we all hung out with a lot of the same people in Washington. I was at the Washington Post, and I hung out with a lot of the folks at the Journal, Wilkie and Simpson, and all those guys. And it was such a great group of people, and who
you
really,
and Milbank,
who loved journalism. Right? We were all so gung ho about journalism, and we were at great.
Well, I'm glad the people are out there are doing it. They're gung ho about journalism. It's much more difficult. And if I was 35 years old, I'd be like, okay, let's go. But I'm not. So,
do you read the Journal still?
Yeah, I read the Journal. I read the Times. I read the Post. I go to Fox News whenever there's big stories to see what they're thinking about it.
See what
I generally avoid TV, though. I mean, I'll go to Fox on big stories, but I don't really care what all those people have to say. And I go to the gym, and if I go on the elliptical, there's all the screens in front of me. I'm like, I try to distract myself.
Right.
So I don't go on the elliptical all that often. But it's a tougher job than most people think, especially now.
And so you've got, your book is coming out. It came out yesterday.
No.
Or this
comes out Tuesday. Coming up Tuesday.
Tuesday. Right. And so what does that entail now? You're going to be in, is it April the 2nd?
April the 1st.
What day are you going to be in?
The books always come out on Tuesdays.
Okay.
Almost all books. Yeah.
But your appearance at a bookstore.
Oh, I'm at a bookstore here in Traverse City, Brilliant Books, on that night, April 1st. And then the next night, April 2nd, Wednesday, I'll be at Schuler Books in West Bloomfield on Orchard Lake Road. Looking forward to that.
6:30.
6:30, yeah. Huh? And I'll talk about the book, and I'll sign books, and then we'll go for a beer or two.
And then what, in terms of promotions beyond that, are you going to, do you have a whole itinerary planned of traveling?
I'm going to do a few more gigs. I'm going to do one in Chicago. I'm going to be in Fenton, Michigan. All this stuff is on my website. And this summer, I'm going to do some stores up here because there'll be more people here.
Right.
And they're always looking for things to do. So they'll go and see an author talk.
Do you get a good crowds there? Like Politics and Prose, which I live 2 blocks away in DC, was always had some really.
Yeah, they get some big name authors. Usually I get a decent turnouts, but you know, you just do your thing. I went to this one in Philadelphia area once. The bookstore owner was on me for months. It's going to be great. It's going to be a great event. We're going to have a lot of people. So I get there, and there were two people, a hockey buddy of mine who lived nearby, and this guy, the bookstore guy, and the bookstore guy fell asleep. So basically me and my hockey buddy, and with no beer. So this was unconscionable.
It seems to be hit and miss with, I mean, Politics and Prose I've seen where it's been packed, where they've had, a lot of people from the Washington Post have read their books there.
Right, right.
I think also like Bill Clinton and a bunch of other big names have been there. But on the other hand, I know when I was helping with the union at the Washington Post, we would have little events, and we had a book reading for Dana Milbank. He had just his book come out, and we didn't get that many people. And Dana, I thought, pretty popular. I mean, I'm a fan of his,
Yeah, me too. I work with him at the Journal.
Oh yeah, that's right. And and he's a funny guy like that. But we didn't get that great of a crowd, so it seems like book events are kind of hit and miss sometimes.
Yeah, it's people have other things going on in their lives. It depends on what time of year, what time of the week. I have no idea what'll happen in Traverse City because I have some friends here, but
right.
The key to a great book event is either you're a big shot, I'm not, or ringers, friends and family that you can guilt.
And how long you been in Traverse City now?
Since June, so what, 10 months?
And what's your feeling about it?
Oh, it's great. We needed to get out of Florida because my wife had allergies, and there's hurricanes, and the politics are stupid.
Right.
And we came here, and it was gorgeous summer, gorgeous fall. It's been a really rough winter, one of the worst in 10 or 20 years, according to locals. But we're surviving, and there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. And you feel like maybe you'll be spending some winters in Florida, or are you done with Florida?
We'll go. Well, we went to Key West this year for a few days.
Okay.
We won't go back there just because it's so crowded. I could see us going back to Florida for a few days here and there, and then we're looking at some other spots. You got to get out of here when there's 2 feet of snow on the ground and it's gray, and get out for a week or two. But
right,
that'll be next year. We went there, and we went to Grand Cayman, and it was fun to get away. And now we're looking forward to spring. It should be here in 2 or 3 months.
and one last question before we remind people to show up for your book signing. Are you working on another book already, or do you take a break in between and you put the energy?
I didn't really have a break. Last summer, my publisher, Severn House, said, we'd like more BITTERFROST books. So I wrote them like a 300 or 400 word pitch. And they said, yeah, we'll take that. And so that's under contract. And I'm working on that now. And Detroiters will recognize, or some will, certainly you will, what inspired what I'm writing now was the Tom DeLisle case from the late 80s. The gentleman who drove a car into the Detroit River near Wyandotte and drowned his children. And he's in prison for that. And so I've always thought that was a fascinating story, particularly as regards the way it was prosecuted. And so I'm working on a story about that. It's based in BITTERFROST, some of the same characters. And there's a judge, a district judge, and his name is Mitzelfeld.
And Mitzelfeld is somebody we work with
and covered that story.
And won a Pulitzer Prize.
And won a Pulitzer Prize. That's right. One of the great things about the Detroit News, we had a hockey team. We used to play the Free Press, and there were 3 Pulitzer winners on that hockey team. Mitzelfeld, me, and Dave Koshinevsky.
Oh, nice. Awesome. Nice. Koshinevsky, another great name in journalism, and a great person. Well, okay, so April the 2nd in West Bloomfield for those who are local.
Correct. Schuler Books.
And then and those who may see this up in Traverse City, April the 1st.
April the 1st, brilliant books.
Okay, excellent, excellent. The book is, I mean, I'm going to order it. Is the best way to get it off of Amazon?
Well, Amazon, bookshop.org, which is an indie site.
Okay,
Barnes and Noble, just about any book site is going to
any
have it.
books, right? Okay.
Yeah, or
Yeah,
go to your favorite, go to a great indie store in the Detroit area. There's a bunch.
right.
Schuler is one of them.
Uh-huh.
Well, you can come Wednesday night, Alan, and you can buy as many copies as you can carry.
Wow. I'll
I'll
bring a
sign
truck.
them all. I'll
I'll
sign
get
them
a
all.
truck. I'll back it up into the back.
There you go.
Well, thanks so much. It's always great talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
We started both at the Detroit News. I think I started in '84.
Yeah, I did
September of
several
84.
months after you did.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was just with in Florida, or excuse me, in Grand Cayman with Mike Schroeder, who
Okay.
joined. The three of us got to be buddies back then.
Yes.
And Schroeder is still a good friend like you are. So.
And you have you have a great story about Ben Burns when you were new there, and you went in the office and you had some tag on your clothing or something.
Oh yeah, I screwed up on a story,
Uh-huh.
and Ben had me in to
He was the executive editor at the
dress
time.
me down, right? And Rick Sayers was in there. He was a sports editor at the time.
Uh-huh.
And it was Sayers who noticed that I still had a dry cleaning tag on my slacks, my trousers, and which I really needed to hear that after Ben told me I screwed up the story.
Uh-huh.
So thanks, Rick. Ben was great. He was a great mentor and friend.
Yeah, he was a great editor. He was really one of. I mean, back in the day when we saw, I mean, it's harder to find. I mean, there's still some papers who still have great editors, but
bigger than life editors.
Yeah, it's bigger than life. And,
yeah, I had him at the Journal. Paul Steiger, and then my direct boss, Alan Murray, was one of my greatest.
And when I was at the Post, we had Len Downey, who was really outstanding guy.
Yeah,
and then they had whatchamacallit, Marty Barron, who was another kind of the last of, and now they're having all the troubles over there. But anyways, well, thanks so much. I'm gonna have to make it up to Travers, and thanks so much for doing this. So
thank you for having me, man. Good to see you.